Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on responding to Best Starts for Kids funding opportunities, tips, and tricks for using data in your application. We are about to go ahead and get started. I do want to point out that this webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to review it later if you like, and also download the slides. I also want to point out that we're going to have a more general conversation about Best Starts for Kids RFPs, and we're not going to be addressing any specific RFPs. So I will be able to tell you where to direct questions if you do have questions about a specific RFP, but we're not going to be focusing on any specific ones here today. While I talk a little bit about what we're going to cover, I would love for those who have joined the webinar to take a moment and type into the chat box what's one thing that you hope to learn today or get out of this webinar. And I'll be asking several times throughout the webinar before we have general Q&A for the participants, you guys to go ahead and type in questions or suggestions into the chat box. So let's get started. And let us know one thing that you hope to learn today. And while we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, we also can answer questions throughout. So feel free, again, to go ahead and type into the chat box any questions that you have as they come up, and we'll address them on an ongoing basis throughout the webinar. So thanks again for joining us today, and we'll go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about today is responding to funding opportunities through Best Starts for Kids, tips and tricks for using data to tell your story. And what we mean by your story, we'll talk a little bit more about, but that's really the most important part of our message for you today. And this is just one of several resources that we're working to make available for applicants. So we'll talk more also about some further resources if all your questions aren't answered today, or if you do have ones that are specific to an RFP that you're thinking about responding to or working on an application for. So what we're going to cover today first is a brief overview of Best Starts for Kids. What's the story? So how to frame your funding proposal, how to find data that will help you tell your story, and then again, questions and answers. The vision of Best Starts for Kids is that we want to see more babies born healthy, more kids thrive, and more young people grow up to be happy, healthy, successful adults here in King County. We're working to build on the strength and resilience of King County families and communities, and we're really proud that this is one of the most comprehensive visions for child development in the country today. How are we working to achieve this vision? Basically, what we say is we want to increase the good, decrease the bad, and intervene when we have to. So promotion, that means increasing the positive factors that contribute to health and well-being that starts before life and continues throughout life. Includes positive relationships, opportunities for growth and development, and safe and healthy communities. Prevention is how we decrease those negative factors like stress, unsafe environments, or insufficient opportunities. Early intervention means providing extra resources to children and families who may need them. And then finally, we have a policy and systems change piece so that all communities in King County have what they need to thrive and prosper. On average, Best Starts for Kids is going to be investing $65 million a year towards this vision. And a lot of that will be going out to community partners through funding proposals, and that's what we're talking about today. As far as how this is allocated, there's 4 key investment areas. The first is investing early, and about half of Best Starts for Kids levy funding will go to the prenatal to 5 age, really supporting kids and families when research shows the impact is the biggest over the life course of those young ones. About 35% of funding will go towards sustaining the gain, or providing resources for young people in King County ages 5 to 24. About 10% of levy investments will go towards healthy communities, providing safe and healthy environments so that people in all communities in King County can thrive. And then finally, up to a maximum of 5% will be going towards data and evaluation. And that's what we'll talk a little bit more about today. We have 3 key principles that are guiding our data and evaluation work. And those are partnership, collaboration, and accessibility. And that's what you can expect from our data and evaluation team members in our work together on the Best Starts for Kids initiative. Best Starts for Kids is going to be funding a really wide range of programs and resources, but data can help make your proposal more competitive and more compelling, we think, in whatever area that you might be partnering with us on. So although the range is broad, data can be part of almost any funding proposal for Best Starts for Kids. And before I move on and start diving into that, I'm curious if you have any more questions about Best Starts for Kids in general. Please go ahead and type any questions that you have into the chat box. All right, I'm not seeing any questions come up yet, so I'll talk more about why use data. What you're seeing on your screen now is just an example of a request for proposals. Each request for proposals is unique and it will outline what the rating criteria that you will be rated on will be. So I want to emphasize that this is just an example, but it does have some components that will be common across most or all RFPs coming out through Best Starts for Kids. So one thing that I want to highlight is that equity and need is front and center for what responses to this RFP will be rated based on. And that's one opportunity where you might want to use data to demonstrate in your proposal on how it responds to that criteria. Another one from this example is proposals would be rated based on how clearly they connect to the BSK indicators. You might see something like this in your RFP that you're looking at. You might even see a list of indicators and be asked to check off which ones you think are most relevant to your program. But you'll probably hear or see something in your RFP about indicators, and I'm going to show you what those are in just a moment. And then finally, we have here highlighted community data or community information will be accepted to find health inequalities. What this means to us is that we are open to lots of different kinds of data and lots of different sources of data. And it doesn't just have to be from this kind of official government sources that I will show you today, but we want to hear from your perception of the community what your needs are. So I've talked a little bit about what you probably will see in your rating criteria. But I also want to highlight what's not in here, which is that you will not be judged based on how many numbers you put in or your ability to navigate the data resources that we're making available. A proposal is not a research paper. It's an opportunity for you to make your case that your program can have a big impact on kids and families in King County. So again, before we move on, I want to just remind you to really take a look at that RFP because it will tell you a lot about what that part of the initiative is looking to fund and how you can connect your story and how your proposal, when it's turned in, will be reviewed. So once you've taken a look at that RFP, we really strongly recommend that you start by identifying your story. This could be a story about the needs or the strengths in your community that you want to build on or address. It could be a story about your organization's capacity to make a difference for your participants or clients. But if you start by finding your story, that will really help you figure out then what information or data will help make your story convincing or compelling. And only once you've kind of thought that through a little bit do we recommend then going out and finding the data you need. There's a lot of information and data out there. Frankly, it can be overwhelming. And you can waste a lot of time just poking around out there, either because you're interested and curious or because it's not so fun and overwhelming to look at. And you can save yourself a lot of time and keep focused on what's going to support your proposal if you start by identifying your story. A couple things that you might want to think about in framing your story is why. What are the inequities or the needs or the strengths in your community that your proposal is addressing? And how can you tell that story? Or what? How will you address the needs, build on the strengths through the activities that your proposal is aimed at? Once you have thought that through, then you can think about what data is going to help me tell my story. There's lots of different kinds of data, as I mentioned, that we are eager to hear in proposals for Best Starts for Kids funding. And probably what comes up first in most people's minds when you think about data is numbers. I'd love for anybody participating, type into the chat box, what's an example of a number that you have used or could use in a funding application to support your story? And I'll share some examples while folks are typing. So one might be a program about a number about a past program success that you have had or a strength of your organization. Here's just an example. 87% of youth participants were placed in internships at program exit. That's a number that you can use to show that you have the capacity to implement a program successfully and support the participants. I'm seeing some other great examples coming in. 90% of clients are low income. That's a great way to show that you are meeting the need in your community and serving those who might need it most. 85% of families come from low income, another great example. Here's a chart that's taken out of the Best Starts for Kids indicators that I'll show you in a minute. These also often come in the form of numbers and can show the disparities going on in our King County communities as well. The next type of data that I want to talk about is maps. I don't know if anybody has ever used a map, but it can be a great way if you're working in a specific geographic community within King County to show what's going on. And here we have another example of a map from the Best Starts for Kids indicators. This one shows that percent of students reporting that they get good grades in middle and high school. And we can see that different regions of the county have pretty different percents. So you could use an example of a map like this to show why you see the need being great in your community. Another example of a different type of data that we welcome and which might not have come up first in your mind when you think about data is stories. I'd love to hear any stories or quotes or ideas for stories or quotes that folks have used in a funding application or pitch or anything like that before. And again, while folks are typing, I want to remind you that if you do use a quote or an image or anything specific to a client or participant in your programs, you need to do so with their explicit permission and make sure that it's confidential, so any identifying information is removed, because you never know who could be on a review committee or this information can be made public if requested, so it is really important to protect the privacy of our participants. But as long as we do that, stories can be a really compelling way to highlight the needs or the successes in your community in a way that tells your story. So I have an example here that I'll read, which came from a parent participant in a local nonprofit's program offering support around childhood development. After my daughter's diagnosis, I didn't know where to turn to find the help we needed. We finally got referred to this program, and they finally listened to us and helped us. It was such a huge relief to find someone who understood. You go from feeling alone to having someone willing to help you out. She was the most important person at that time, and she referred us to services I don't think we'd have otherwise. Now I know we're on the right track. My daughters learned to make eye contact and give hugs, and that helps us so much as a family. You can probably tell that I've taken out a lot of specific details about the family and the program in question here, and think of stories that might be even more compelling with those kind of details still in them that you could tell about your own programs. And finally, the last type of data I want to talk about today is images and videos. If anybody has any examples to share, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. And before we go over an example, again, I want to remind you that when you're responding to an RFP, it will probably say whether you are welcome to submit images and videos. Generally speaking, you are, but that might not always be the case. So be sure to check your RFP and ask any questions for the designated contact, or attend a bidders conference or information session for that RFP if you do have specific questions. But where images and videos are welcome, they can tell us, what is this, the phrase, a story's worth 1,000, or a picture is worth 1,000 words. Here, this is just a stock photo, but it can tell the story of a young person achieving academic success. And I'm seeing a question here: how likely is it that a review committee will watch a video? I think it's very likely. I can't guarantee that every reviewer would watch it if they have technical issues or running out of time, but generally speaking, I think that they would. And I've seen some really powerful examples in some of the applications that have come in that I've had a chance to see so far. So if it's short and if it comes from your organization, I would encourage you to submit it. If it's really long, that might impact the likelihood that a reviewer will watch it all. And if it's not from your organization, I think it kind of comes back to that question of how well is this really telling my story. But if it is about your work or your community and it's a few minutes long, I think it can be a great addition to a proposal. Again, it's always worth double checking with the contact listed on the RFP if you're not sure whether it's welcome. But if they are welcome, I think generally speaking, reviewers will watch them. So now that you've thought through some different kinds of data that will help you tell your story, where will you find it? I'm going to spend some time on the webinar today showing you different resources from King County. We're putting a lot of data out there and we want it to be accessible to our community partners. But before I dive into that, I do want to say that I'm going to go back to the bigger picture after we look at these and remind you that this isn't the only or the most important kind of data or way of telling your story that you might want to use. So I think at this point, it'd be great if my colleague can give me control so I can click around some of these here. And I'm going to show you some specific websites that are sources you might want to use if you've decided that this kind of data is going to be useful in your proposal to demonstrate the needs or give other information about your community. So thank you for your patience while we make that switch. The first website I'm going to show you is the Best Starts for Kids Indicators. And I've mentioned this a couple times, and could be a great source for finding information about your community. Again, it's not the only source, but we want to make sure that you know what it is and where to find them if you want to use them. So the Best Starts for Kids Indicators are kind of the big picture goals that as an initiative we want collectively our activities to have an impact towards here in King County. So it's you'll see a long list on our indicators website, and there's several different ways you can navigate it. So you can look in the result area here, and you can see that they are divvied up by prenatal to 5, 5 to 24, youth and family homelessness prevention, and communities of opportunity. You can also look by indicator type, headline, and secondary. And I want to comment briefly on this because as somebody writing an RFP, it doesn't really, that's not a very important distinction to you, but I want to explain it just because you'll see it here and may be curious. The headline indicators are those big picture indicators of health and well-being for children and families in King County that we are monitoring. The secondary indicators are indicators that we think will help show us if we are making progress towards those bigger headline indicators. So that's what those terms mean to our evaluation team. But as far as working on your proposal goes, you're not going to get any more points for using one kind of indicator over another, or for that matter, using data from the BSK indicator site over other sources either. Another way, because this list is a little bit long, another way you can find indicators that might be relevant to you is through the search. So say you're doing something with kindergarten readiness, you can search kindergarten and you'll see here, this is where the indicator is. Most of these indicators are presented in visualizations, and they're interactive. They can be really cool if you know how to use them, but they might be a little confusing for folks that haven't. So I want to take a moment and show an example of what those visualizations will look like. If you click the name of the indicator that you're interested in, it will take you to a website or a web page like this, and you will see first a summary. And I also want to point out that we're pulling information from lots of different data sources into this indicator's website. So you won't see the exact same information available for each indicator because it's coming from a different source. So we're putting what we have up there, and that might be a little bit different, but the visualizations will work the same either way. So here you see King County broken down into cities and neighborhoods, and when you hover over one, it will give you more data. So here we see that 7.3% of moms living in the Snoqualmie, North Bend, and Skykomish region had their births early, and this is lower than King County average. If we look over here, we might see that 11.1% of moms living in West Kent had their babies early, and that's higher than King County average. So if you are serving a specific geographic community, the maps can be a great way to just visually see what the disparities in this particular indicator might be. If you scroll up a little bit, though, you'll see that there are a variety of tabs across the top of the visualization, and you can use those to look at different kinds of information about the topic. So if I click on the demographics tab, you can see that there's lots of different demographic information in here and different kinds of disparities that communities in King County might be experiencing based on these different factors. So one is mother's age. Another one is mother's education. And again, when you hover over a bar, it will give you more information. So here we see that 12% of moms with an education level less than 8th grade had their babies preterm, and this is higher than King County average. Race and ethnicity, again, we see disparities there. So if you're working with American Indian Alaska Native moms, Black and African American moms, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander moms, this data can help you make the case that the families that you're serving are indeed high need and indeed experiencing inequities. And then finally, you'll also see the geographic breakdowns here in the demographics tab as well. I want to point out that right now I don't have the chat window open, but please do continue typing any questions that you have, and we'll discuss those in just a moment. I can't read them as they come in, but we certainly will be answering them. There's also a trend tab, and this will show you changes that have happened over time. And often it can be broken down by different kinds of demographic information as well. So here we see how preterm births have changed in King County from 2003 to 2015. Broken down by race and ethnicity, we could also look at it by region. So this shows us that South King County has the highest rates of preterm births, and that in fact this disparity, it looks like, has been increasing a bit over the years. On the Maps tab, I'll click that, but it's essentially the same as what you see on the summary page. Again, what kinds of geographic breakdowns you'll see might be different based on the data source, but we do provide as detailed of information as we can. It's also handy, you can look down below the map here and see the highest and the lowest. So lowest here is Capitol Hill Eastlake area, highest is South Auburn. And this map works the same as the one I showed you on the summary page. Finally, if you really want to drill down to your focus community, Custom Demographics offers you ways to break the data down even further. And this one can be a little confusing for some folks, and I want to emphasize that if you don't want to use this function, you by no means have to. It won't impact how your proposal is reviewed, but if you are interested in it and if you think it can help you tell your story, you can look at, for example, specific racial and ethnic disparities by region. And so even beyond what's going on in King County as a whole, I can look at what disparities moms of different races and ethnicities are experiencing by region. So if I'm looking at Black and African American moms, I see that they're more likely to have preterm births if they live in East, City of Seattle, or South King County compared to Black moms who might be living in North Seattle. And you can do that breakdown by any of the demographic categories that we have. So you can divide it up by list. If I wanted to look at it the other way and say, okay, within each region, what are the disparities? You can do that too. So here I can say, all right, I'm serving East Region, King County. These are the racial and ethnic disparities specific to my region. So that's the Best Starts for Kids indicator website. I want to mention that some of those indicators do come from our Best Starts for Kids health survey, which is one that we did specific to families in King County. 6,000 families participated over last fall and the very beginning of 2017. And when you look at those indicators, you will see on the bottom a little note that gives you some opportunities to ask us questions or give us feedback about the data. So if you're looking at something and you don't understand what this means, or you want to say, this is really inconsistent with my experience, we welcome your feedback and your understanding of the data that we're putting up there. And there's a link to a short survey or an email address for Best Starts for Kids data that you can use to communicate with us about those data points. All right, I'm taking a look at the chat box now just to see if there's any questions before we move on. Hold on just a moment. Oh, I want to mention for folks that might be joining us on the phone, if you do have a question, you have to unmute yourself and we can unmute you as well if you have a question. Okay, so the next information source that I want to introduce you to is our Communities Count website. And this has information about a broader range of topics than Best Starts for Kids, and it also has more text putting that information in context. So if you do not love clicking around in those charts, the Communities Count website can be a great place to start because we have a little bit more narrative there to help you understand what all those numbers might be saying. I'm seeing a question in the chat box that says, do reviewers prefer that applicants use data from the BSK website? In many cases, this data is not specific enough for our purposes, e.g. the neighborhoods or zip codes we want to focus on are not separated out. That is a really good question, and I would say no, reviewers don't have that preference. We'll talk in a moment about what some different ways you can get creative if you don't see that information. We do, as part of our equity commitment, put the data out there in as many different demographic breakdowns as we can, but there's definitely cases where you might not find what you want there, and you will not be penalized at all for not using data from the Best Starts for Kids website. While we're talking about Communities Count, I will add that this is a great place to find data that is separated out by veteran status and disability. So if you're working with those communities, I would definitely recommend Communities Count as a possible source of information. All right, so let's go ahead and click on Communities Count, and I'll show you what that looks like. When you come to the front page, you will see a data spotlight, and that rotates based on something that we think is new or relevant or interesting at the moment. Let's see. Thanks for rolling with our little technical processes here. I really appreciate that as we are kind of figuring out how to best work these webinars. But so here we are. Hopefully now you're looking at the front page of the Communities Count website. And this gives social and health indicators across King County. And again, there's a wide range of topics, wider than you might find on the Best Starts for Kids. And one thing I want to point out that is particularly helpful on the Communities Count website is this population data. So if you're looking for basic information about who is in your community, population is a great place to look for it. So when you click on a tab, you'll come again to an overview page, and you can look at that right-hand bar to show you what information is available within that topic. So here I'll just pick maps by cities and neighborhoods. And when we open this map, it's going to show us population information for a number of different factors. So we can look at either the number or the percent of folks in different racial and ethnic categories in King County. And we can look at those charts on the side that show the breakdown across the county as well. So in this case, you see that it's looking at members of the American Indian Alaska Native community. And if we hover, just like with that other visualization, you'll see that we have about 1,142 folks, part of that community in the Black Diamond and Enumclaw areas of King County. So that's just one example. You can find a lot of different kinds of population data here on the Communities Count website. And then another really helpful tab that you will find on Communities Count. Here we are. If you're on the home screen or any other page, you can look across the top and see data resources. So I'll show you that briefly. This will provide you links to different kinds of data specific to our area, community health indicators. Most of these are in the resources that I will show you in a moment, but if you're just looking for where to find data, this can be a helpful portal to start with. There's even some specific suggestions and guidance on using data to support your grant application here along the bottom, as well as links to the King County specific data. So that's a great place to start if you're just wondering where to find data about King County. So the final website that I'm going to show you in a little bit of detail is the City Health Profiles. If you are serving a specific city in King County, this is a great way to get basic information about health and well-being of the folks in that community. So it's not for every city, but there's quite a few. So if you click the name of a city, I'm just going to pick Burien as an example. It will take you to a document, and they all have basically the same information about each city. And it'll show you on a map. It'll show you an introduction, a little bit about how to read these charts. So you'll see a blue bar that indicates how that city is doing on that particular indicator. You'll see a purple circle that represents the value for King County overall, and an orange circle that represents the value for Washington State. And this is the same for each city health profile. You get demographic information, and then you'll see some key health indicators specific to that city. So in this case, if we're looking at Burien, we see that overall this blue bar for Burien is higher than both the King County average and the Washington average for having fair or poor health. So that might show us that folks in Burien are just in a really general measure of health not doing as well as King County as a whole is. So that's the kind of information that you will find in the city health profiles. And again, it's really helpful if you are serving a specific city area. I'm going to take a moment to look at the questions, and we can go back to our slideshow at this point. So as I mentioned, we're putting a lot of data out there, and we want to make it as accessible to our partners as possible. But these are not the only or even the most important sources of data that you might use for your funding application. In addition to the ones that I've taken a moment to highlight here, there's a few more that we might recommend for local data about King County. And let's see, looks like we're still getting our slides back online. But I wanted to include these just so you have the references, and they are available to you if you're looking at the slide deck later. So one of those is the community health indicators. If you're looking for more specific health information about, a wide range of things, smoking, physical activity, certain health conditions, you can find that on our community health indicators page. If you're working on education information or working with school districts, there's a lot of data that the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction makes available on their website. And then for a select number of school districts, based on their requests and their permissions, that we put together health profiles kind of similar in format to the city health profiles that we looked at. So if you're proposing a program or a project that you're working with a school district, or it's specific to communities in a school district, that can be a place to look for data there as well. So getting creative. This goes back a little bit to the question about what if we don't find the information about the communities that we serve in what's out there. I'm seeing a question here. Will this presentation be emailed to participants? My understanding is that it's not going to be emailed directly to you, but it's going to be posted on the blog. So if you're subscribed to the blog or the newsletter, you will get an email when it is posted up there, and you can go ahead and view this again or download the presentation at that point. So it will be available to you, although we won't be sending it directly to your inbox, except for, again, through the blog notifications and the newsletter. So say that you want this kind of statistical data about a community that we don't have in any of these King County sources. I have some ideas. I'd love if anybody participating puts up some of their own suggestions of ways that they've found data to include in a funding application as well. So say you're working in a specific local area. There might be community development associations or other community organizations that have put together helpful information specific to your community. Some examples here include community data from White Center or from the Chinatown International District in Seattle. There's many more. Those are just a couple examples. You might be serving a racial or cultural community that we don't have as good a data for. There could be national organizations, advocacy organizations dedicated to those communities that also can be good places to look for information. So here, again, just a couple random examples from the Urban Indian Health Institute with information about American Indian Alaska Natives, or one from GLSEN, which is an organization that works with LGBTQ students. So if you're interested in doing the digging, the world's your oyster shell, and you probably know best about your community or your topic area, what might be some national or local partners that could also be good data sources. Finally, we've focused in this webinar so far on how to use the data that we're putting out there once you decide what will be helpful to tell your story. But it's not the first or only place you should look. In fact, you might want to take a look at your own organization first. You're the expert on your community, and you probably have access to really important, really compelling, authentic information that can help you tell your story, and that the reviewers for Best Starts for Kids RFPs are really eager to hear. So you might have participant or client quotes, like the examples that we looked at a little bit earlier. You might have stories reflecting on the needs and strengths in the community that you're serving or working within. You might have your own program data from relevant past work that shows how successfully you've been able to impact your participants or clients. Or you might have numbers about your membership, leadership, or reach. One thing you might see in the RFP is that we're looking to support organizations that reflect and are embedded within the communities that they serve. So if that's true, you might be able to have numbers about your own organization that shows that staff or leadership are reflective of the community. So I'm seeing a comment in the conversation that the census, let's see, I'll read it out for those on the phone. The U.S. Census website has been a great resource for local data for us. In some cases, you can drill down to the zip code or census tract level. The Census Bureau is holding a number of free webinars this month and next month to help users find and interpret census data. That is a really great resource. I'll see if I can find a link to include when we do post this information. And for those of you who might not be familiar with census tracts, they're a really small geographic area, probably the smallest that you'll be able to find data for. So again, to the question about if I'm working in a community that's so specific that I'm not finding data from these other sources, definitely census tract data could be helpful if you want to use it. Seeing another suggestion, general data sites, data.kingcounty.gov and data.seattle.gov, both excellent resources. In King County and the City of Seattle both have commitments to data transparency, and they're putting a lot out there. Those are wonderful suggestions. But again, before we move towards wrapping it up, I want to highlight the importance of the data that you have from your own organization, your own community, or your own past program work as a really rich possibility for helping tell your story. So putting it all together, what's an example of a story you could tell, and where would you find data to support it? I'd love to hear some examples in the conversation. And again, as you're typing, I'll go ahead and share an example that we've used in the past. So in this case, we're thinking about a program that provides support for young parents. And here you see an example of how you can pair up numbers or quantitative data with stories or quotes or qualitative data. So we've got a little chart that shows percent of parents that feel they have emotional help with parenting most or all of the time, in King County, and you see that foreign-born parents or parents where English is not their first language are less likely to feel they have that emotional support. So this is a piece of data that could help make a case for why your program's providing support to parents from those communities. And then here we also have a quote: "It helps just to have someone tell you that you're doing a good job." All these different things that help with temper tantrums and potty training, just knowing about all these things, it helps. This quote's attributed to a young parent living with her family in South King County with her boyfriend and their 2-year-old. So this is a great tool to think about using these stories or quotes or images to kind of illuminate the numbers that you might put in your proposal, because they can really help bring that emotional impact home to reviewers. So the key takeaways that we're hoping we've shared with you today are to start by reading the RFP carefully, because it really, they can be long, they can be dense, but they should tell you really what we're looking to fund and how your proposal is going to be reviewed. And once you've gleaned that, start by thinking about your story, how you're going to pitch your program, your proposal. When you have that in mind, what data can support it that you might already have, what data you might want to find from King County. We hope this webinar has helped you get a little bit more familiar with how to do that if you'd like to, and what other information from local or national sources could help. Again, especially if you're serving a specific community that you don't see reflected in the data that we have available. Again, all of these different data sources are equally valued in our review process. We just want you to have the ability to use what we're putting out there if you'd like to, and to find what you want to find. So you've put your data together, ask yourself, does it help me make my case? You only have a few short pages, and nobody's getting gold stars for putting the most numbers in their proposal. So choose the data points, choose the stories, choose the images that help you show the need and the potential impact that your program may have if funded. We do have some additional resources beyond this webinar, of course, that we encourage you to use when you're working on your applications. And the first that I want to talk a little bit about is technical assistance consultants. For most of the RFP processes going out, technical assistance is available for free to applicants or potential applicants. And you can look in your RFP for their contact information and any limitations on what times you need to be in touch with them or anything like that. I just mentioned that because sometimes the technical assistants we've been working with get a lot of requests at the very last minute. And so we might ask you to get in touch with the technical assistance consultants before the last couple days, before the RFP proposals are due, so that they have time to respond to all the requests that they're getting. So be sure to look at that. Those technical assistance consultants can help you from the very beginning of the process, just saying, you know, is my idea a good fit for this RFP? To helping you understand the process of responding to an RFP, especially if you haven't applied for or received government funding before. It might be a little bit different than what you've done before, or maybe you just don't have that experience. And those technical assistance consultants can help you navigate the process. They can help you kind of refine your ideas of what will help you pitch your case in your proposal. And they can also review, edit, and proofread drafts. So they are there, they are free to you. The county is paying for their support. And they're a great place to start. If you have questions about data, they should be able to help you with that too. So definitely use them if you feel that you need to. I see a question coming up. Are data citations or footnotes counted in a proposal page count? Again, there might not be one answer for all of the RFPs, but generally speaking, I would say no, they are not included. But if you have questions, if it's not clear in the RFP you're responding to, you can definitely submit that as a question. As a rule of thumb, no, but it's always good to double check your specific RFP before making a commitment. Other resources that you can use are the Best Starts blog. We'll be posting more blogs about Best Starts data there, the Communities Count page data resources that I showed you, and again, another general source for King County Health data, in addition to the awesome suggestions that have been coming up on the conversations page. So with that, I want to thank everybody for participating today, and we'd love to hear any additional questions that you have about using data in your RFP. Again, we aren't really here to answer questions specific to an RFP, but more general questions about using data or how RFPs, how the reviewers look at data, anything like that. So I'll give a moment for folks to go ahead and type any questions that they might have. We're also going to go ahead and unmute everybody on the phone at this point. So if you are participating on the phone, and you have unmuted yourself as well, you can go ahead and speak up that way too. I also want to mention that we have a really short, it's 3 questions, it will take less than 2 minutes, feedback survey, and we'd love to hear what you thought of this webinar. It's our first time doing something like this, and your feedback's really going to help us refine the resources that we make available going forward. So please, you'll get that link. You'll get that link, and it just would take a moment to give us some really helpful feedback. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions come up. We will wait another moment or two just in case anybody is taking a moment to kind of articulate their thoughts. But again, thank you so much for your participation today. This is going to be posted on the blog. If you want to refer to it later, you'll be able to watch either the video or download the slide deck, and that SurveyMonkey link is now up in the chat box. So we're going to end a few minutes early. You could spend just 1 or 2 of them taking the survey, letting us know what you thought, what was helpful, what else you would have liked to see. All right, well, thanks so much, everybody. I hope you found this webinar helpful. Best of luck working on any funding proposals, and we'll see you on the blog and on our social media soon.